Aha. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. On this, I'm imagining no matter where you are, it's chilly. And I know Hokyoji's looking at a possible high of 0 today. So good luck to the Wim Hof guys. Well, I'm Carl Holtman. I'm the executive director here at Hokyoji, and it's my pleasure this morning to introduce my good friend Kyoku Tracey Walen, who resides at Hokyoji and yet spends 1 week a month up in the Twin Cities teaching at Clouds and Waters Zen Center and Rush City Prison and seeing her students. She was ordained by Byakuren Judith Ragir in 2008, and she received Dharma transmission in 2015. She trained for 3 years at Great Vow Monastery and with Thich Nhat Hanh in France. She worked as a business consultant and a financial executive in corporate America until she discovered the Buddha way and retired to take it up full time. And we appreciate that decision, Kyoku. So the floor is yours. Take it away. Oh, you're muted.
There we go.
Yes.
All right. Well, I'd like to dedicate my talk today to Martin Luther King in gratitude for his deep spiritual practice, his courage, and his unflagging efforts to free all beings. May we all be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. So, as I prepared this talk, I realized that I have the idea, or have had the idea, that when Buddha decided to teach the Dharma, he became the ultimate problem solver, spreading wisdom effectively, meeting all challenges, and solving all problems. But this was not actually so. Shakyamuni devoted his life to helping all humans free themselves from suffering. An ancient sage grieved for us and offered us the Dharma. That's a phrase, I think it's from the Jewel Mirror Samadhi that we chant in the mornings as part of our service. So as he had expected, he met many difficulties. You may remember that when he first awakened fully, he thought about things and he was talking with beings that we probably wouldn't be able to recognize, but they came to congratulate him and take care of him. And he said, you know, it would really be, this is very subtle practice, it would really be tiresome to share it with other people. And that's when the other, we'll call them angels of wisdom or prior Buddhas, I don't know what to call them, but anyway, his helper beings came along and said, please take another look. It really is worth your work. He did, and he thought about it, and he said, okay, this is subtle, this won't be easy. So even though I have this idea that he's got no problems, we actually have no problems. I'm just part of that program, but he understands it and can recognize it, where I'm still working on that. But fortunately, my heart is quite committed to it. And thanks to Hokyoji and many beings, I have to help me uphold and continue. However, I want to share my continuing contemplation, my continual koan about why the Buddha would not want to have women practice the Dharma. So we know about Mahapajapati. We know that she was flatly turned down by the Buddha when she asked him the first time, and 3 times he said no. Just plain old no. Not a lot of discussion. I've been using this book, which is The Life of the Buddha, and it was put together by Bhikkhu Nanamoli, who has written many other things. And I like this book because it basically summarizes a lot of the Buddha's life without, just completely referenced in sutras. So there's not a story, and he does his best job to simply give us a translation. So let's see. Yeah. So what happened with Mahapajapati? It's a little chilling. Okay. So it says, after Mahapajapati's husband, Suddhodana, was the Buddha's father, died, she went to the Buddha, paid him homage, and she said, Lord, it would be good if women could obtain the going forth from the house life into homelessness in the Dharma and discipline declared by the Perfect One. And the Buddha responded, enough, Gautami. Do not ask for the going forth from the house life into homelessness for women in the Dharma and discipline. Boom. She asked 2 more times because part of the tradition at that time was that if you asked 3 times, then you were making a very sincere request. But he said pretty much the same thing a second and a third time. So she was pretty unhappy about it, but she left. And eventually he actually left the place where they were and went or started to wander in stages, going to another place called Vasali. In the meantime, in her distress, she cut off her hair and she put on a yellow robe, which probably is significant of being a widow, I'm not sure. And with a number of other women from her clan, she set out on foot to also go to Vasali, where the Buddha was going. She got there. She stood outside of the porch of the building where the Buddha was meditating. Her feet were swollen, her limbs were covered with dust, and she was sad and unhappy and sobbing. And as she stood that way, her son and the Buddha's or cousin, Ananda, also the Buddha's attendant at this point, said, Gautami, why are you standing outside on the porch like this? And she said, the Buddha does not allow the going forth of women in the Dhamma and discipline. So he said, wait here till I ask the Blessed One about this. So Ananda went to the Buddha and he said, Lord, it would be good if women might obtain the going forth from the house life into homelessness in the Dhamma and discipline, as declared by the Perfect One. And he got the same response that Mahapajapati received. Enough, Ananda. Do not ask for the going forth from the house life into the homelessness for women. So he too asked a second and third time and received the same curt response. I'm adding curt. That's my point of view. So he thought about it and he said, well, maybe supposed I asked the Buddha in a different way um, about this. And so he then asked the question, Lord, are women capable, after going forth from the house life into homelessness, of realizing the fruit of stream entry, or once return, or non-return, or arhatship? They are, Ananda, said the Buddha. So then, in his wonderful Ananda way, he said, well, if that is so, Lord, then since Mahapajapati Kotami has been exceedingly helpful to the Blessed One, when as his mother's sister, she was his nurse, his foster mother, his giver of milk, she suckled the Blessed One when his own mother died. Since that is so, Lord, it would be good if women could obtain the going forth. So the Buddha said, Ananda, if Mahapajapati Gautami accepts 8 capital points, that will count as her full admission. So first, a flat no with no real explanation, just bam, no. Asked 3 times, still no. He said it to Ananda, and then, okay, here's what she has to do to get admitted. I find that puzzling and frustrating. So what did he say she needed to accept in order to be admitted? He said, a bhikkhuni who has been admitted even 100 years must pay homage to, get up for, reverentially salute, and respectfully greet a bhikkhu admitted that very day. So no matter how old you get, how wise you get, if there's a newbie that comes into the Sangha that's male, you have to salute that person just as you would me. A bhikkhuni must not spend the rains in a place where there are no bhikkhus. So you can't have your own private, separate Sangha in a way. Every month, and this is a little in Buddhist language, but essentially every month there was a meeting at which there were observances and celebrations in the Bhikkhu Sangha. And basically put yourself forth and admit any wrongdoing and have that heard by the Bhikkhu Sangha. Again, the Bhikkhu Sangha from young ones who were as young as her son, or, as old as the most ancient of beings. At the end of the reigns, a bhikkhuni must invite criticism of both sanghas, meaning the male and the female, in the 3 instances, that is, whether anything improper in her conduct has been seen, heard, or suspected. However, the bhikkhus don't have to return that. That's just something bhikkhunis need to do before bhikkhus, and they also need to do it before their own bhikkhuni sangha. When a bhikkhuni has committed a grave offense, she must do the penance before both sanghas. A probationer who seeks admission must do so from both sanghas and after training in 6 things for 2 years. A bhikkhuni must not find fault with or abuse a bhikkhu in any manner at all. From today onwards, it is not allowed for bhikkhunis to address discourses, in other words, give talks to bhikkhus, but it is allowed for bhikkhus to address or give talks to bhikkhus. Things are to be honored, respected, revered, and venerated. They are not to be transgressed as long as life lasts. So then he asked, does Mahapajapati Kodami accept these points? And essentially she said, yes, I accept these 8 capital points, not to be transgressed as long as life lasts. Now, let's see what comes next. Okay. The Buddha said, you are now fully admitted to the Bhikkhuni Sangha and to the teachings and practice of the way as a home leaver. So she went on her way, and then Buddha turned to Ananda and said, if women had not obtained the going forth from the house life and entered the Sangha, the Dhamma, and the discipline, the holy life would have lasted long. The holy life would have lasted 1,000 years. But now, since women have obtained it, the holy life will not last long. The holy life will last only 500 years. Now, of course, for us, we don't think that it hasn't lasted for over 500 years. So that affects my thinking about it. It's like, well, it turns out the causes and conditions weren't as you thought and we're still around. But is this really what he was talking about, what he was practicing, what he was doing essentially was putting first the training of the next Buddhas so that the Dharma and the practice of the Dharma could continue and could essentially be strong enough to create heirs. So I hadn't really thought about it that way. It's not like, like I said, it's my koan, but I've been curious about it. And so I kind of looked into some other, I didn't kind of look into, I thought about other stories that relate to this whole thing. And I started to think about essentially, I'm in a position where my ideas of me and how the world works and what's fair or unfair or good or bad is very close to me. And so I'm not seeing things the way Shakyamuni is or the way any Buddha would. So when I think about it that way, it does give me something to chew on and think about in terms of my challenge, my resentment, my unhappiness about the Buddha just being matter-of-factly, no, women can't join. Essentially, I realize, oh, part of what's going on here is he went through a whole lot. He knows a lot more about what it means to have a fully enlightened view. And he's putting the continuation of the Dharma before how I feel about being left out of the Sangha. And that probably is because he knows a lot more about the causes and conditions that will help to continue giving rise to Buddhas. That seems to be certainly in what he's talking to Ananda about. If this hadn't happened, then it wouldn't have shortened. The causes and conditions would be different. And it's like, well, why does that have to be so? But that's because I have an idea about what really great, really perfect would look like. And that idea also needs to be seen through, purified. And for the Buddha to do that without having anybody to teach him, that was a fully realized Buddha, meant that he really had to dig deep in order to arrive at this place. So there's a certain way in which I can honor it. But there's another part where it's like, well, why does it have to be this way? So this commitment to continuing the creation of Buddhas who can continue to teach the Dharma is very major for the Buddha. And that's had its impact on me. So there's another thing that comes up after this. They think when in this book, they try to put things as best they can in an order, so we get a certain sense of what the Buddha's whole life and career look like. But there's a lot of guesswork. Nonetheless, these stories all come from the Vinaya, the record of the Buddhist teachings. So the next thing I wanted to go back to was the quarrel at Kosambi. So again, this is a story a lot of people know. There were a sangha of fairly committed bhikkhus that was practicing with the Buddha. And one day, let me get this from here so it'll be easier to understand. So this is what happened. There were two bhikkhus in one monastery, one an expert in discipline and another a teacher of discourses. The latter went to the latrine one day and left a vessel there with some unused washing water in it. The other went in later and found it. So it was the teacher that was good in the discourses who went to the latrine and left the vessel, and the expert in discipline who found it. So he asked the teacher of discourses, "Did you leave that vessel with water in it there?" And the bhikkhu, a teacher of discourses, said, "Yes." And so the other asked him, "You did not know it was an offense?" "No, I did not." I mean, there's like 275 rules for bhikkhus. So that was one of them, each one of them having a good reason for coming into being. So the teacher of discipline says, "It constitutes an offense, friend." "Then I will ignite," said the other one. But but this is the teacher of discipline said, "If you did it unintentionally and out of forgetfulness, there is no offense." So the teacher of discourses went away under the impression that he'd done no wrong because he didn't realize it was an offense. But of course, the teacher of the discipline knew that it was in the rule book. Nonetheless, this was the situation. Long story short, essentially, after thinking about things, the teacher of discipline went back and told his students that the other teacher of the discourses had done an offense. And he said, "This discipline expert said first that there was no offense, and now he says that there was one. So he is a liar." So there we have it. All of a sudden, there's a problem. Now, this came to the Buddha's attention because there was some back and forth, and there was sort of talking among each group of each of the teachers. And the Buddha learned about it, and he said, "There will be a schism in the Sangha. There will be a schism in the Sangha." So part of me says, or has said anyway. So this is the first time there's been a schism in the Sangha? No, but really the Buddha was saying something more than that. He said, this is the beginning of the end if there's a schism. And this is the first time such an argument has arisen in this group. So immediately he understands far more deeply than I do, how dangerous this is. he can see all the way to the end of this. And so he's very alarmed, and he goes and talks to the group of the teacher of the discipline. And he says to him, essentially, you don't have to do this. You can understand that he doesn't understand. And if you do go forward, then I can tell you there will be quarreling, brawling, wrangling, disputing, and eventually schism, division, and dissenting acts in the Sangha. So before his very eyes, before he dies or decides to stop teaching, here is a serious impediment for all the work that he's already launched on to the continuation of the Dharma and discipline and the opportunity for all beings to be free from suffering. So these are things that when I'm in my normal walking around mind, and that I get mad about. It's like, wait a minute, Nonetheless, the Buddha actually knows a lot more than I do. He can see through to the end, and he goes to the other guys. He goes to the bhikkhu who went into the latrine and left the vessel. And he says, you don't have to be hindered by needing to admit this. There's a lot more at stake. If you do this, then all the people in the Sangha that you sit with, that you share with, all the interaction and connection disappears. But he gives them the same list. There's brawling and wrangling, and this will eventually lead to the breakup of the Sangha, and certainly will not lead to the freedom from suffering. But each side ignores them. And in fact, there's an interesting phrase in here. Let me see if I can find it. Another bhikkhu says, Lord, let the Blessed One, the master of the Dharma, wait. Let the Blessed One live devoted to a pleasant abiding here and now and not concern himself with this. It is we who shall be known on account of this quarreling, brawling, wrangling, and disputing. And a second and a third time, the Blessed One spoke to him and said, these misguided men seem obsessed. They seem to be determined to do exactly what I'm telling them will lead to the end of what the life that they're living and the commitment they've made, and to the non-suffering of all beings. So he got up and he went away. The Buddha kind of threw up his hands and said, I've done what I can do. Now they must do as they see fit. And there's a couple of things that he said along the way, including the most well-known, which is, it is he abused me, he that beat me, he that worsted me, that robbed me. Hate surely is appeased in those who cherish no such enmity, for enmity by enmity is never in this world appeased. Hate by hate is never put to rest, essentially. This is an ancient principle. Those who do not recognize that here we should restrain ourselves. Still, there are some who are aware, and so their quarrels are appeased. So there's some people that don't view life this way, but right here and right now, there's a lot of people that do. So he's done his best, the Buddha, and he one of the things that apparently it was written as something he said was, if you can find a trustworthy companion with whom to walk, both virtuous and steadfast, then walk with him, content and mindfully, overcoming any threat of danger. If you can find no trustworthy companion, in other words, my situation right now, if you can find no trustworthy companion with whom to walk, both virtuous and steadfast, then, as a king who leaves a vanquished kingdom, walk alone in the woods. walk alone, harm none, know no conflict. And so then he went off and looked for a lone male elephant in the woods where he knew he would be able to find one and some solace and company while they both did their thing. Well, long story short on that one, eventually somebody came to the Buddha and said, would you give a talk? And eventually the folks that were supporting the monks when they begged each day were saying, it's been a long time since the Buddha's given a talk. He's gone away and he's not come back. And I don't think we're going to continue to feed these guys if they can't basically uphold the Buddhist teaching. We won't uphold them. So there was a variety of things that happened, but long story short, the Buddha gave a talk. The two guys that were being problems and their following came to their good senses and basically said, let's not keep doing this. And so they both agreed. And the Sangha was temporarily, for how long we don't know, back in a peaceful situation. However, this issue of, well, how are we doing, keeps coming up. Let me keep, what time am I at? Yeah, so I'll go a little bit longer. So following the quarrel at tsunami, Shariputra, who had been sitting in solitude and contemplating the Dhamma and discipline, Shariputra at this time was one of the Buddha's disciples. He had arrived in arhatship, so he had fully realized the same Dhamma that the Buddha had realized. But he had been studying, and he learned that there were prior Buddhas that had very short-lived sanghas and other Buddhas that had long ones. And so he came to the Buddha and he said, I'm curious about this. Essentially, why did some Buddhas have very short times of teaching? What were the characteristics that led to that? So essentially, the Buddha said, go again. So here's Shariputra. Lord, what was the reason why the holy life did not last long in the time of the Blessed One? And he names 3 prior Buddhas. And the Buddha said, essentially, because they didn't have a monastic code, they didn't repeat the teachings every way and every day. And he said, this is like flowers that are unbound. They, without the binding and support of those things, they fly away. So even though these were fully realized Buddhas, and part of the reason that I can be a fully realized Buddha, their sanghas didn't hold together. And essentially what happened is that their immediate successors were continuing to teach the Buddha, the teaching, but they didn't have the strength of repetition and sort of an embedding of the teachings in the way they lived each day. Instead, there were infrequent talks and such, and essentially the students of those Buddhas did not have the monastic codes and practices of our Shakyamuni Buddha to offer to their students. So by the time it got to the third level of passing it on, what happened was the holy life just lapsed. And what does he say here? He says, the disciples enlightened by these prior Buddha disappeared, and then their disciples, most recently gone forth, variously named, of various races and various clans, soon let the holy life lapse. Those blessed ones habitually read their disciples' minds and advised them accordingly. Once in a certain awe-inspiring jungle thicket, one accomplished and fully enlightened read the minds of his Sangha, and he offered them good advice and instructed them in it. Give attention to this, do not give attention to that. Then by the following his instructions, their hearts were freed from taints. But Lord, what was the reason why the holy, hold on a second. So he says, that was why the holy life didn't last. It didn't have enough supports. So then Shariputra said, well, what made the long-lived Buddha Sanghas last? And he said there, many threads of argument, songs, expositions, stanzas, exclamations, sayings, birth stories, marvels, and questions. The disciples' training rule was made known. The monastic code was laid down. And so this, he goes back to his analogy of the flowers. So this is a bouquet of flowers that is firmly held together, and consequently, it can survive in that form and continue. So Shariputra said, well, it's time to make this monastic code known to our Sangha. At that time, apparently, the Buddha had about 500 disciples. But he said the most backward of them is a stream mentor, meaning that they've done enough practice at a deep enough level of understanding that they will not revert to householder ways. So he said, right now, we don't need to have it. And he said, actually, the monastic codes isn't needed until we spot people where the taints have taken hold. That's what this monastic code is helpful for. And so he explained that. He essentially, he said, when a person sees impermanence, perception of not self becomes established in him. And when a person perceives not self, he arrives at the elimination of the conceit I am. And that is nibbana, here and now. So he said, there's a lot of ways for taints to get in the ways. And so he explained those to Shariputra. He named them. He said, they may manifest themselves in a Sangha that has become great by completeness, or great by excessive gain, or great by learning. But in these are the seeds of infection. And so when the taints start showing up in those sanghas, that's when the monastic code needs to be introduced. And there are a number of stories that go with this. But if I come back to my situation, and the reason I'm giving this talk is with each one of these stories, I begin to understand more clearly what I wasn't realizing was at stake, which is that even though the Buddha says to his own folks, there will come a time where nobody will know anything about the Buddhist Dharma. And the last story I'll tell you very quickly is one I think you probably also may have heard. And that is when Mahakasyapa says, after some period of time, when there have been taints and the monastic code has been introduced into the Buddhist Sangha, he says, why do we have more rules and fewer established and final knowledge than we did before we had all these rules? And the Buddha says to him, that is how it is, Kassapa. So there comes through, I guess, the other thing that's hard for us to necessarily realize, which is that first causes and conditions. So there is always karma. And if we don't plant and nourish and actually cultivate the soil in which those seeds of Buddha can grow, then that's how it is. That will happen. It has happened. It will continue to happen. And all we can do, I realize as I read this, is try to make the conditions and soil capable of growing more Buddha heirs for as long as we can, because that karma determines the next karma. When beings are degenerating and good Dharma is disappearing, the good Dharma does not disappear until the counterfeit good Dharma appears. So he's saying here, when the taints start showing up, let me see if I can see, let's see. He says, he says, essentially, the taints can show up and even be conquered, but the clinging doesn't disappear. And until the clinging is absent in the understanding of a bhikkhu, then we are always subject to the continuation of the life of suffering, the life of grasping, the life of not allowing things to be how they are, which is one of the things that has been an obstacle for me in my understanding. It's like I've got an idea about what the perfect world looks like, what the world that the Buddha realizes, what that looks like and how it will be. And we need for it to go on forever so that things can be fixed. And what the Buddha is deeply teaching us through these conversations with his most senior monks. So Shariputra and Moggallana were his ongoing disciples. And they both died before the Buddha did. So he's very familiar, the Buddha is, with how that impermanence is just the way things are, and that inevitably circumstances will arrive and it will, the Dhamma will temporarily disappear. So where am I now? I'm realizing, I guess, much more vividly that our ideas hinder us, and how difficult it is to accept things just as they are, just like the Buddha does. He's there, he's given his whole life to this. He's working like a madman to make sure that this Dhamma, which has disappeared, comes back and lasts as long as a sage he can offer that Dhamma. But it's also just true that won't always be there. That's not permanent. And in light of that, then I realize it's a big deal to say, let's cut in half what I know will be the trajectory of letting women into the Sangha, even though they too can become Buddhas who can help to keep the Dhamma alive. So I realize why the breaking up of a Sangha is also of huge concern to him. Why he could say in another story to Ananda, don't say the Sangha is 50% of the Dhamma and the discipline and full realization. It's 100%, because that's where the taints arise. That's where we live. That's where we go off track despite our best intentions. So let me finish with Martin Luther King, who I think also realized what Shakyamuni realized. He was continually trying to recruit white-bodied people especially, but all people also, to action that reflected we're all interconnected. We don't really know how non-suffering looks. And we need to collectively work at this and realize that one of us can't be happy while the other is unhappy. We're all unhappy until our point of view is enlightened by the light of this teaching. So he knew none of us could enjoy freedom from suffering. All of us needed to work together. And he gave his life for it, literally. He gave them, and I think also there are stories that say that Buddha was poisoned. And we know the story of Gandhi, and Thich Nhat Hanh managed to make it all the way into his 80s, but he was certainly in peril. So it takes a lot of courage. And I just want to say, ask away. I'm open to any. I'd love to hear your comments and your points of view and your questions, which I'll do the best I can with. But I'm also want to say, I'm awfully glad you're here and I'm in this Sangha with you. Okay, I'm going to do Jushin. Who wants to go first? Who's willing to make a comment or ask a question? How are things for you in your life?
Well, thanks for the talk, Kyoku. And I know there's actually a couple of novels about Kosambi that are available, and the main character in the novel is a monk in that sangha where they have the problems. And I know when I read that story, it was like, the Buddha worked and worked with these people, and then he just kind of gave up and he left in the middle of the night without telling anybody. He just walked away. But the other part about the women in the Sangha, I think, we can't forget that this is 2,500 years ago, more than that, and what the culture and the politics and things were like at that time. And he had some very conservative head monks there. Who was the guy that took over the Sangha after he died, even though Buddha said...
Mahakassapa.
Yeah, he was a Brahmin. And the Buddha asked him to teach the young monks that came in. He said, oh, no, they're not worthy of my teaching. He wouldn't do it. I mean, this is what the Buddha was dealing with. And, and he finally gave in and came up with all of those extra rules for the bhikkhunis. And I think a lot of that seems to me that he's appeasing the conservative uh, forces that are in his sangha. I don't know. You know, he thinks that maybe the sangha will get torn apart by this if he's not really careful about how it goes on. Um, you know, thank goodness for Ananda. You know, uh, but
Our hero.
yeah, Ananda. So anyway, you know, thanks for the talk. I mean, the context on these old teachings is really important to try to divine. We don't know the context. We have to kind of divine it, you know, by inference or something like that. But the context of the time is important to try and understand. Yeah. Anyway, so thanks.
I think one of the things that preparing this talk made me realize is that I might want to, first of all, not stick to any idea that I might have to it, but also to open to the possibility that this statement, that's how it is, includes how it is when the opposite sexes get together. I remember a woman who was born and raised as a Buddhist in Sri Lanka who came to America. And when there was a sexual issue between my first teacher and one of the students, the senior students, um, I talked with her and I said, you know, are you still talking to him? What do you think about this? You know, because there is a Sri Lankan a Sangha that's quite strong in the Twin Cities. And we found that out when she became a priest. We couldn't hold all the people that came to the center. But she looked at me and she said, "What did you expect?" So this is a certain just kind of sex is sex, you know, it's hormonal, it's there, it's not going anywhere. And it definitely complicates things in terms of becoming Buddhas. And you know, in our current environment, there's a lot of the precepts that are not kept nearly as strictly as the Buddha kept them and insisted that his disciples keep them. So there's this whole affection for seclusion and being away from people in general. So it gives me pause for thought about whether that way of saying, well, this is not then, this is now, and circumstances are different. It's like, but are they really? Is something that I kind of am more open to, and really just staying open to this whole kind of always simply having that question be open and stepping into life and do whatever I do. Maybe we call it a mistake. We might certainly call it suffering, and really be committed to learning from it and observing it and not forgetting that my ideas and me are also not the way I think they are. Who else wants to say something? Or will say something?
I mean, to your point, I think sex, similar to anger and any other sort of strong passion, is one that's mediated by community and precepts, and not just in a Buddhist context, but you know, any religious community, and one that, yeah, you have to be careful and conscious and mindful of. I don't know if that should be the reason that women are kept from striving for enlightenment and wisdom. And in fact, you know, that's sort of an old sort of trope that men are subject to the wiles of women. And as you know, And I think sort of to Carl's point, just following the logic of non-self, the Buddha, as much as any other enlightened person, is subject to the whims of society and the force of society, as much as Gandhi had blind spots around caste and anti-blackness, in his perspective of sort of liberation movements in South Africa. I'm sure that Buddha did have blind spots, but I can appreciate what you're saying in terms of dealing with this fundamental frustration of the Buddha does not really give any logic of why. It's just no. And then he suddenly changes his mind. And so I don't know if I have a particular question or a comment, but I can see the value of your koan, of this slow discernment of what's underneath it on a personal level and a community level, and trying to decipher, is this just the Buddha being sexist? Or are there other elements that are there? And just sitting with that tension. So I appreciate that teaching.
Well, thank you for your comment, Abe. I think this that's the way it is. It's is a strong element of my willingness to open to my view of things. It's like, it's like put water into a temperature and it'll turn into ice. It's not, a circumstantial thing. It's when conditions are right. There's almost, we have plenty of evidence in plenty of other types of religious sanghas that sex is a major, we have a hard time practicing according to the rules. So I just kind of keep that as, you're not at a place where you see completely and deeply. And so you don't have to close the door on this and say, okay, well, it's this or it's that. You can keep it open and keep observing. And that in and of itself is an encouragement, because it's pretty hard to do that. I'm always surprised when all of a sudden I get enraged about something. And even if I don't express it outwards, it's like, what am I so upset about? And that's an important part of practice. And the discipline is also, Thich Nhat Hanh, when I was there at his Sangha in France, gave a talk, and at one point in it, he said, now I'm 80 years old and I can do anything I want without breaking the precepts. And then you realize, as he keeps talking, that's because he's learned how to keep the precepts all the time. And so that's the way he lives. He lives in a way that's not breaking precepts. But it was clear that he had a sense of humor about, well, now that I'm 80, that's different, Carl, I'm trying to cut us off when we need to.
I could say something. Thank you so much, Kyoku, for your talk. Your central koan is a koan for me as well. And it has stirred a lot of anger in me, in really over years, if I'm honest. And it's really interesting to pair it for me with the acceptance that this is the way things are, and they still are this way. That's also true. Misogyny is alive in Buddhism today. Like, it's, as is racism, as is classism, as is all of this harmful, really harmful energies. And I think somehow coming to the place of kind of knowing this is the way it is, and pairing it with my vow to end suffering, and imagining that this human being, a human being, Buddha, and the complexity of that time and the complexity of his decisions, he was just a man trying, I suppose, to end suffering. And it's an incredibly complex thing, at least in my exploration of it in my life. And so I can come to a place of empathizing to some degree with what he was navigating. And similarly, maybe I can offer the same empathy to myself or compassion to myself, trying to navigate what feels like some very strong energy of wanting the world to be more just and more kind. And this clear understanding, or the clarity of knowing that this is the way it is, and then somehow bridging into clear action to try to alleviate just a little bit of suffering, maybe just even in myself, around these really painful questions. And I'll just share, when I was Shuso in my Sangha, I had the experience where my teacher asked me to read something, and he had me change the pronouns to female pronouns, and I started to weep. And it was like this moment of realizing how important it is to be seen, just how important it is to be seen. So anyhow, it's personal, it's collective, but I really, really appreciate hearing how someone else is exploring it, and the depth of your practice and knowledge in helping us continue to explore what it means to hold our preferences with some grace and lightness, to then maybe move towards a little more clarity of how to work within some very painful energies. So appreciate you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I think this conundrum of realizing that it is our deepest wishes, our strongest instincts, that are exactly the teaching that enables us to go beyond them. And this reality where whatever arises dies, it's just one moment at a time, is something that I want to get a picture of. And that's not the way it works. So this kind of opening to a recognition of how doable it is and how seeable it is not. Ryushin, do you have any wisdom to share with us, or any comments?
I don't know about wisdom, but you can. One of the things that interesting to me is like the sangha that you mentioned, that they're going to split a little bit.
We see that right in front of us every day in on television and in politics, you know.
I know, that's what I was thinking. It was like democracy. Yeah, we're gonna break apart democracy because of little things. They interview people in Iowa and they say, well, I thought Obama split the country. Anytime there's some kind of progressive movement, there's this backlash. So I think Carl's point is well taken, that allowing women into the Sangha it seems like, well, we have to treat them as second-class citizens because that's the only way the culture is going to allow this movement to happen whatsoever. So I just got a little sticker from Planned Parenthood that just says, "Enough is enough. Enough is enough." You can take that so many different ways, but it's a wonderful little sticker. Just enough is enough. So,
and particularly in the context of celebrating Martin Luther King and his work in the world. I mean, that's helpful to me because that's even more insidious. And so, wow, it's just not something we can put into I have to move out of my head and just let whatever's happening in my heart and gut propel me with the commitment to the precepts, so that I don't cause harm in the process. It's just if as soon as I try having ideas about things, it just is stunting. It really, the longer I work with that kind of energy, the more I realize, and thinking, the more I realize that I really don't know. I just do not know. And if I can live with that, then there is unsurpassable and always accessible equanimity. Happiness might be a little bit strong, but it's not excluded. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. We're waiting for our host to cut us off.
Yes, so, well, good. Stimulating subject matter here this morning on this chilly day in Minnesota. Thanks for joining us. Let's see, next week we have Shoto Spring will be giving a talk. And in 2 weeks, Dokai will be back from New Zealand, and it will be his turn to give a talk. Right now at Hokyoji, we have the Wim Hof cold weather training, and I don't know if they're getting more than they bargained for here with the change in the weather, but more power to them. And about 2 weeks out, we've got the winter practice period. The 3-week winter practice period is coming up, and the first 2 weeks will be led by Dokai and Onryu, Gentle Dragon, GD. And it will be a study of the Diamond Sutra, I believe. And then for the 3rd week, are you leaving?
I need to leave because I need to help Bo and Dawson.
Okay. Go ahead. Anyway, the 3rd week will be Brad Warner and Dokai leading the Sesshin week, and the Dharma talks will be about the teachings of Katagiri. So we're looking forward to that. So let's close with the 4 vows. So, beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Thanks so much.